everybody. This is Dr. Craig, and I'm here with Dr. James in America. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Craig. Thank you for having me.
I'd love for you to share some of your background and how you came to be where you are, because you've got an impressive portfolio of things that you've done and doing.
Yes, it's all very serendipitous, but just looking at where things were going, that's how I ended up here because I started with a background in fine art. So my original degree actually was in oil painting, and then I went on deciding I didn't want to teach and I didn't want to teach as an MFA, so I went on for an MA and PhD in art history. And that's how I got my current position at Lindenwood University here. You fast forward a few years, and I was made assistant dean of online and graduate programs. And so at that time, we didn't have any online or graduate programs, so I had to learn about that world. So went back, got some extra degrees in leadership, and then also in game design, which was relevant as we were opening up an XR lab and looking really to collapse, especially during the pandemic. The amount of space and time between instructors and student-to-student interaction, et cetera. And so at the time, the metaverse was, the word of the year. And so I was told to go forth and integrate VR across the institution. So I put together the VR champions. We started doing research and setting up an XR and gaming lab. Given that my field was art history, it was easy to start integrating it in my area first because everything is visual. Whatever we're going to be doing is going to be taking students around the world. And so putting that in every single class and developing training as well as an XR database for instructors was our first step. And then expanding that across all these various areas. We did that and continue to do that. Actually, we'll talk about our most recent research and projects that we have going on now. But then we were restructured, and then the new dean says, you should really start looking into this AI thing. And so that was back in 2021. So I was like, okay. So then we took the same model that I had set up for the VR champions. We identified those that were already using AI across all the disciplines, everything from education to business to nursing, healthcare, everything. Brought them together and did an institution-wide study to see what was already happening. They became the AI ambassadors, so they were the go-to people in their given area. This is pre-generative AI. And then I started working with others who were creating their own algorithms through machine learning using Python. We started doing some studies on how that might impact creativity. Our first study was actually on creative writing in the spring of 22. Then how this came to be was I was presenting on metaversities, which were novel at the time, in the summer of 22 at Oxford. And I came across another neuroscientist and they admitted that they had used AI in working on finalizing their dissertation. And I found that that was kind of odd because they said it in such, a bashful and a hushed tone that it was something to be ashamed of. And so I came back, and that was when we were seeing all of these AI art generators coming up on social media, was the summer of 2022. So I came back. I went to our colleagues that were using this for research and writing, and I said, this is going to be a thing. We need to start the studies now. There were 6 major tools that were out at that time in the early August of 2022. One of them being the OpenAI Playground, but not the stable launch yet of ChatGPT. So we looked at how all of them could be adopted in English composition. Then I worked with my colleagues in art and design to see what impact this might have in the classroom for art and design. So we did studies in 3D design, drawing, digital art, web design, and that turned into our book, Creative Convergence. That's out now, just looking at what would this mean across these various disciplines. And of course, now we're also publishing another one on English composition during the age of AI through Routledge. So that'll be coming out this summer. Kind of bringing all those studies together. So then we had the stable launch of ChatGPT was the last of the generative AI text tools that we used for that initial study in the fall of 22. We came back, and then obviously it was everywhere. You had the stable launch and the largest adoption of any technology in history as of February of 2023. Everyone trying to figure out what to do about it. So we continued our studies. Luckily, we already had data. We already knew what the impact was, and that students were not champing at the bit to use it. They were very hesitant and were very wary of it. They were more concerned with the ethics of it and what would happen than actually using it to complete their assignments like we were asking them to do. So we had that going into our institutional studies. So we began upskilling all of our graduate students, and then having weekly sessions for faculty and staff that could stop in, try new tools, see what they were doing in their given areas, et cetera. And that led to further integration. Until now, we'll be launching in fall of 24. I'll be over a human-centered AI department with masters and certificates and minors, et cetera. So across various areas, they'll be able to learn how to use it and integrate it. Obviously, ethically and responsibly is the idea of the human-centered aspect of it. But it's not discipline specific. So you don't need a background in computer science. And as we see moving forward, the idea of having specializations in education will slowly begin to be replaced by interdisciplinary kinds of expertise, as we will be required to do a greater variety of things with these tools that allow us to moving forward. And so more kind of generalist knowledge seems to be coming to the fore in certain areas.
So that move from specialization or specialist subjects to interdisciplinary studies, that's at the university level that you're seeing. Do you think that elementary, primary, high schools need to move that way as well in integrating bodies of knowledge?
Interestingly enough, they were ahead of us. And I've done a lot of talks at various institutions. And what we're looking at now is, with Gen Z, the last generation of students coming out of secondary education, coming out of high school, that have the kind of hidden curriculum expectations associated with original content, plagiarism, academic honesty, et cetera, before AI was fully integrated. And so we're seeing a lot of, paranoia, I don't want to be accused of using this, et cetera. So this is really the last generation, because we did a study of K through 12 educators in the US, with over 5,000 of them, and found that they were not hesitant. They were very open and optimistic. They wanted to integrate it. What we're finding, though, is, and we should note that it's already in Google Chromebooks. It's planned to launch, and so it's going to be in Google Classroom. And so the next generation, Gen Alpha, my children's generation, will come out with these tools and those expectations moving into college. And so they're already doing this, amazingly, in elementary and secondary education, but in different ways. That being, what we find is from kindergarten through roughly fourth or fifth grade, teachers are really thinking about, how can I use it in terms of time saving or efficiencies for me as a teacher, as an instructor. So filling out paperwork, making rubrics, things like that. Once we hit roughly fifth and sixth grade, it kind of flips, and that's also when we start seeing typing and other different types of written content creation kind of shifting from learning how to write by hand, right, and penmanship, to once again doing more word processing. And so at that point, we're seeing them consider more about how to integrate it on the student side. And so they'll have the tools. They already have a more integrative curriculum anyway in K through 12 than in post-secondary education, which the only thing people really have in common is the general education core, and then that splits off to their particular major in U.S. institutions. But yes, I see that's definitely happening already in K through 12.
Right. And so implementing AI across the university, and I think I read on your profile about it being in all majors across the university, that's a big thing. I imagine the champions really helped with that.
Mhm.
I'd love to ask about the processes you had to put in place, any policies, training, resourcing to support those champions, so that that barrier was removed when someone says, well, who's going to train me? Or, what regulations do I need to meet?
Yep, that's still ongoing, but we have another book coming out on institutional generative transformation. That one's also coming out for Rutledge. I just met earlier with our CIO, asking those exact questions, and so it's a very timely treatment, in that it's not a straight line, and that there were many starts and stops, because one of the biggest obstacles that institutional leaders have had moving forward is really in legal. That being, ensuring that you're protected as far as data privacy, as far as FERPA and HIPAA, these other considerations. Because with the open large language models and other examples that people were familiar with, from Bard before it was renamed, Gemini, to ChatGPT, to Llama, right? So all of them, unless you opted out, could have the potential of leaking fiscal information, private information, etc. And so that was one of the biggest challenges there. And so the solution that we're having moving forward is obviously looking at a semantic overlay with things like what Google's doing, Google Classroom, but then more specifically for us, it'd be Copilot, right? To make sure that the data can actually be kept internally. But yes, as far as the processes, it started step by step, relatively small, with any institution, depending upon how many resources they actually have available and the size of the institution. So starting off with looking at what existing expertise you might have in house, right? Looking at capabilities and capacities. So who do you already have that is interested in and playing with these tools? In any institution, you're likely to find these individuals. You just have to identify them first, and usually their colleagues can help. Like, oh yeah, he once again works, and is already scripting in or programming in Python, right, and making his own algorithm. So you need to talk to this guy. So first off is identifying internal talent. The second one is starting to put into place regular professional development. So this can be done first informally, seem to work best for us. I know there are formal trainings that have gone in as well that other institutions have put in motion, but low stakes, weekly synchronous and asynchronous sessions, so they can come in person and ask questions, and/or be working remotely at the same time. Many of our meetings now are all through video conference, through Teams, even if we're next door to one another, for instance. And so starting off with that, then moving on to incentivizing them. So one of the ways in which that was proposed was offering badges for AI ambassadors, so they can put in their email, and then have others complete X number of hours of PD in order to also get said badge. But obviously other certificates and micro credentials that can be through a given learning academy. Many institutions have those dedicated to professional development for both faculty and staff. So we don't want to forget staff. And so as far as the policies were concerned, though, and looking at how this was being used, we want to make sure that all constituencies are brought to the table. And so in coming up with how training should be organized, we did institution-wide studies, surveys for all faculty, staff, and students. And so looking at, what they were doing and bringing in small groups in order to do kind of Q&As of how they're using it, what they see, the value of it being, and what types of training would benefit them most. Some wanted asynchronous that could be completed on their own. Some may be somewhat embarrassed that they feel that they don't know as much as they should at this point about what this AI thing is. And so, giving them a low risk and somewhat semi-anonymous way to do that without, asking questions that might embarrass them in front of their colleagues, to those that want more intermediate or advanced training that are more comfortable with it. And so, a range of it, but, getting the buy-in. And that's kind of the main thing that people are still concerned with that we talk is, what about academic rigor and honesty? And so the best way for that is to realize, number one, we don't have evidence to show that there is widespread cheating or plagiarism compared to what there was before 2022. The same bad actors continue to use the tools in such a way. Others are know that they need to use it, and in our studies, which are backed up by what we're also seeing happening out there, is they know this is something that they need for their future. They know they need to become AI literate, but they're not getting in most cases, the training and or the information how to do that. And so really touching base with them, getting buy-in, being here's when you can use AI, here's when you cannot use AI. And the biggest takeaway that we've found is there's kind of been a don't ask, don't tell, sweep it under the rug kind of approach in many institutions. That being, there's not making institutional policy, leaving it to individual instructors, but needing to put it in the syllabi, but still, then sending something up the ladder for academic dishonesty if it wasn't outright addressed of how it should be used is complicated. And so that's kind of the first thing is talking about it in class has worked rather well. That being, here's what the tools are, here's what they're capable of, here's why you shouldn't use them for this task because you're going to need to develop this specific skill moving forward. And you can use it for these tasks because they will help you, organize your thoughts, go through iterative or creative kind of organization, or automate certain repetitive things that do not really reflect higher order thinking skills or metacognitive skills. And so, but it's really being honest and open and talking about what is expected and just being clear. And then once the students have buy-in and you say, what do they think it should be? What do they think they should know and be allowed to do? Then many of them you can also do, peer reviewing and self-policing. So they'll keep each other in check.
I saw a lovely testimonial online from one of your students saying that your communication is fantastic. Even when she asks a question, sometimes you reply within the hour always, but sometimes in minutes. How do you manage your time?
Yeah, time management. Well, that's going to be one of the most important. It's funny, we were presenting at another institution on the importance of durable skills in the age of AI, and one person mentioned that time management was moved to one of the most important among those durable skills,
Mm,
which will be absolutely true. I myself have everything kind of organized in such a way that it either goes through my desktop pad, smartphone, and or AirPods. I only teach, online now, so I primarily do research and have meetings such as we're doing now, which frees up the rest of my time to be able to be agile and responsive in that way. But I've always maintained an open line of communication nights and weekends with students. We have a large non-traditional population, so a lot of adults, a lot of people that are working with families. So the times that they need help are nights and weekends. And so
mm,
I just, knowing your audience and knowing what they need, that's one of the big challenges of online education in the 21st century is, especially with COVID, is feeling like you're out there, right, on an island alone. And so you need to make sure
mm,
that have someone there, even if it's just, oh, okay, I'll look into that in the morning or I'll get right back to you. It lowers that anxiety pretty much
mm.
immediately. But you're right, time management. If you look at what's going to happen with Generation Alpha or Gen AI, as I call them, the estimate that they will be working less but much more focused and doing a greater variety of output. So time management will become even more crucial for them.
Mm. Well, Dr. James, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. What is the best way for someone to get hold of you if they want to?
Yep, the best way is LinkedIn. So I'm always on, making sure that we stay up to date, which is seemingly hourly with what's happening. So you can get to touch with me there. And so that's why I keep, active engagement with experts in the field who are working on their specific area because it's just too much to keep up with. But no, I'm happy to meet and discuss any of our research with individuals that are interested.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.